Hey, what's up, everybody? We have a new YouTube channel. Make sure you subscribe right now. Leave a comment on the video. Share it with your friends. It's also a podcast, 3 and Out, wherever you listen with me, John Middlekauff, Apple, Spotify. We have you covered, as well as thevolume.com. We have merch. Check out. I got 3 and Out hats right now. Thevolume.com. Search the podcast. Buy some merch. Okay, we have some breaking news in the National Football League. Something we saw coming based on what happened during the season. Russell Wilson cut from the Denver Broncos. Literally just happened a couple minutes ago, and I was like, got to fire up a video. Have to give out a couple quick thoughts. And I think the first thing, listen, the moment he was benched and that story came out about them pushing back about the guarantees on the contract, and he didn't play the last couple games, it was clear it was done. I think logistically, you waited till after the combine, hoping, keeping your fingers crossed, if you're the Denver Broncos, somehow you could eat some money and just give him away for a 7th-round pick, help facilitate a trade, which was going to be extremely difficult and clearly was not an option, because the entire NFL and any team who has any interest in Russell, which I think it's pretty clear teams that would be interested, the Raiders, the Steelers, the Falcons, the Patriots, you just kind of go around the league. Obviously, the interest will vary team to team, but it doesn't cost any money. The Denver Broncos are now on the hook for almost $40 million of a salary. So in theory, you could get the guy for a veteran minimum contract, pay him about $1 million, and get a guy that can be your starting quarterback. Now, before we dive in to this upcoming season, what could happen with them, let's do a little bit of a look back. Because I think, and listen, I don't pretend to be Belichick historian here of every trade in the history of the NFL. But in my life, in major team sports, and I don't count hockey because I don't follow it, though I have a lot of respect for hockey players and the sport, especially the playoffs. Basketball, baseball, and football. I think you could argue this is the worst trade in the history of pro sports. They gave up 2 1s, 2 2s, Drew Lock, Shelby Harris, and Noah Fant. And they paid the guy 5 years, $160 million guaranteed. The moment he signed the contract, $120 million was guaranteed, whether he ever played a snap or not. He got a $50 million signing bonus. They put all their chips in the middle of the table. Now, I'm not trying to play Monday morning quarterback. I thought the moment Aaron Rodgers decided, he kind of toyed with them and then ended up staying with the Packers, they pivoted. And a couple years ago, General Payton, as I call him, worked with John Schneider and made the trade, which they were very, very desperate. Now, you could argue, and anyone in business will tell you this, and I think most human beings, whether it's a $1,000 deal or whether it's a $200 million deal, deals made out of desperation typically can backfire, right? Anytime you go to a negotiation knowing you don't have the leverage, one, and you're not going to say no, you're at a position that doesn't have the power. Like, if it goes bad, you're going to get screwed because you are prepared to pay a premium. And the Broncos did just that. And then they doubled down with the contract. And it backfired in their face. 2 seasons into it, they cut him. By his 2nd season, a coach that they had just given $90 million to didn't want him at his quarterback, wanted him off the team, did not want him taking snaps. And listen, I understand why Russell Wilson refused to negotiate his contract after it was already signed and take away those guarantees. If you put all of us in his position, we would have done the same thing. And if you put us in Sean Payton's position, we also would have done the same thing. Hopefully, try on a wing and a prayer to somewhat get out of it a little bit. They were not able to. Now, I don't think it backfired like, oh, this looks bad upon the Denver Broncos. No one cares. Most people around the league, when you just talk about as a person, aren't that big of Russell Wilson people. And his career fell off a cliff unlike anything I've ever seen. And the guy that deserves the most credit by a mile, is the guy that once upon a time stood up on the table, pounded the table, and told Pete Carroll, I know he's short. We need this guy. He wanted to take him in the second round. And Pete Carroll's like, can't do it. And Russell Wilson changed the trajectory, or helped change. The defense was a big part of it, of Pete Carroll and John Schneider's career. But they also knew him the best. And they thought about getting rid of him 5-6 years ago when they wanted to trade him to the Cleveland Browns for the number 1 overall pick. Why? Because John Schneider believed in this inaccurate, really physically gifted quarterback from Wyoming. He wanted to take Josh Allen at number 1. Now, because Russell Wilson wanted no part of the Cleveland Browns, the trade didn't happen. But this was on their mind as an organization a long time ago. Well before us, fans, whether you're a Seattle fan or just an NFL fan, could see it. You're like, wait, you're going to trade him? It's a pretty risky move. I thought it was crazy when they traded him. Crazy would be the wrong way to put it, because clearly he wanted out. The relationship between Pete and Russell wasn't quite the same. Russell wanted to be a star. He wanted to cook. He wanted it all built around him, like Aaron Rodgers or Tom Brady. It just turned out he didn't have those capabilities. And he can't play within the constructs of an offense. He needs to be able to freelance. The problem with being some great freelancer, you better be a great athlete, which once upon a time he was. But the guy we saw in Denver 2 years ago who was overweight clearly was not. This year he was lighter. He was definitely more agile, but still, a pretty average player. I don't give a shit what the stats say. We all watch the Denver Broncos play, and Russell's just kind of average. And you can't be average when you sign a 5-year, $250 million deal with $160 million guaranteed. It was a disaster. And let's face it, anytime in an organization, I don't care what business you work in, when you work in a business and a new leader comes in, a new boss, a new CEO, a new owner, regardless of what you do, the person that hired you and believed in you and who was behind you, supporting you emotionally, financially, and was your supporter, when that guy no longer has the same amount of pull, you're going to be in trouble, especially when you stop being as good at your job. And when you're talking about numbers like this, hundreds of millions of dollars, the pressure on you to be elite is really high. It's why no one has issues with Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson or definitely Patrick Mahomes. Pay them a ton of money and they're freaking awesome. We don't even think about it, right? But Jalen Hurts is a good example. He got a lot of cash last offseason. Deservedly so. Just balled out in the Super Bowl, had an MVP type season. The pressure on him then to play like that every single season, and if anything, kind of incrementally improve, comes into play. That's why people started criticizing him. The moment you get huge amounts of money, critically, we view you and talk about you a little differently. Ask Kirk Cousins and Dak Prescott for the last 6-7 years. The difference with Russ Wilson was the trade. All they gave up, the amount of draft capital they gave up on top of the money they gave once he was on their team. And it was a disaster. And like I said, I don't think it's hyperbole or hot take culture. This is the worst NFL trade of all time. I truly believe that. It doesn't get any worse. When you're talking about being okay with cutting a player that's going to leave $85 million in dead cap on your salary, on your books, because you don't want him anywhere near your operation. You don't want him on the field. You don't want him in the locker room. You don't want him around. You want him gone. You don't have a solution. One reason Belichick gets so much shit is when he drew the line in the sand, like, yeah, Tom, we kind of think it's over. You're 42 years old. We're not willing to give you a contract. Like, go test free agency. Belichick's not the first guy to do that. But he didn't have a backup plan. There was no contingency. There was no other quarterback on his roster. And he wasn't in a position to draft high to draft a guy. So he didn't sign Cam Newton until like the summer. And it sent the spiral, which a couple years later led him to now be out of the league. Right? When you trade Joe Montana and you have Steve Young waiting in the wings, it's a lot easier to make that move, right? When you trade Alex Smith because you believe in Patrick Mahomes, it's easy to make the transition. But when you have no answers, the Denver Broncos have no answers right now. They don't have a guy on the roster who can be their starting quarterback. Sorry, Jared Stidham. I mean, the draft is right around the corner. Maybe they get aggressive and trade up. But the unknown in the draft pick, pretty well documented. The majority of those guys don't become good players. It just shows you how little Sean Payton thinks of this guy. And what I think is going to be fascinating now moving forward is what teams are interested. And I think because of his money, teams are going to be interested because it's not going to cost much. Let's face it, he's just viewed as a weird guy, which we're all a little weird. I think at that position, though, historically, Peyton Manning, Tom Brady, they all have their own quirks, but no one ever questioned them like, God, they just get along with everyone in the building, from the cafeteria to the training room to the equipment staff to the practice squad guy. Everyone likes the guy. And when it's like, he's kind of weird, kind of off, doesn't really resonate with the group, usually not a good sign. Now, I think Pittsburgh should be all over him because, one, kind of desperate. Like, let's face it. You can't roll into next season with Kenny Pickett when Joe Burrow and Lamar Jackson are in your division. Can't happen. And you got to play teams that have guys like Patrick Mahomes and Justin Herbert now with Harbaugh. Like, even Aaron Rodgers is coming back to town with a rehabbed Achilles. So I think Pittsburgh, I think the Raiders, New England, Atlanta, they're all going to sniff around. I think his market is going to be fascinating. How aggressive will teams be? He's clearly, Kirk Cousins is the number one quarterback, and he's coming off a major injury heading into free agency. This is the NFL. Things can change like that. You can be one of the greatest players in the league. An injury, age, declining play, a couple years later, it's like, guy's pretty average. We'll take him for nothing. It happens like that consistently in the history of this sport. And he's a great example. And Seattle deserves a lot of credit on this because they took a lot of heat from every angle. They nailed it. And they took advantage of an organization who was so desperate because after Peyton Manning retired, they were a fucking disaster at quarterback. They were their mark. And they bent him over the table. And they took everything they could. And they helped change the course of their franchise with those draft picks and that cap space that then they got because they never had to give Russell Wilson that contract extension. And now you're looking at a franchise in Seattle who I would say from a talent standpoint is trending up the first time in a long time because of the draft capital they were able to utilize to improve their team. And you look at Denver, which besides Sean Payton, who is under this massive contract, has way more questions than answers. And it almost forces them to be aggressive in the rookie quarterback market because of financially what is going to happen to their books this year. Because of what Russell Wilson cost them and this contract, the implications it has on their organization. Now, I think in life, like, you got to take big swings. Sometimes you're going to miss. It happens. Ideally, I got a bug flying around me. It happens with a positional player that even if you overspend in free agency, it doesn't cripple you. When you miss on a free agent quarterback at an astronomical amount of money, with the amount of guaranteed money that is not relatable to any other position, even, for example, Bosa, who got a historic, the most non-quarterback ever, like $120 million guaranteed. Russell's $40 million more, and his contract was done 12 months before. So it just crushes you. It does. And this also shows in the NFL when new coaches come in, when new administrations come in, things change really quickly. A player that was once liked or highly invested in is on the outside looking in. And if you're Russell Wilson, like, the moment they started coming with you with that guaranteed stuff, it was clear, like, why would you even want to be there? If you are going to resurrect your career, it's not going to be with this coach that does not like you. It was never going to happen with Sean Payton. I never believed it was going to happen from the jump. I heard some rumors at the combine. He told ownership, like, I'll try to give it a year, but this is not my type guy. He's not going to be able to run my offense. And he couldn't. And then he didn't. And now he's no longer a Bronco. And it's just one of those stories. Ton of headlines are going to happen over the next couple of weeks. Guys traded, big name players. Some big name players under contract on other teams are going to get huge contract extensions, big trades. It's inevitable. It's been happening consistently now for the last half decade. Some of them are not going to work. Some of them are going to be an absolute tire fire. Some of them are going to be awesome, like when the Rams traded for Jalen Ramsey, or like the Dolphins when they traded for Tyreek Hill. Worked. Hell, that was a win-win. And then some of them are going to be like this in a couple years. We'd like to have that one back. But now Russell Wilson is a free agent, and it's going to be fascinating to see where he ends up landing.